Do you go by Richard or Dick?
Dick.
What's your middle initial?
Pedro
Oh,
Gonzalez.
don't touch.
My middle initial is F.
Okay. And where were you born?
In Pennsylvania. High Spire, Pennsylvania. And my birth point is home base right now of the Pennsylvania Turnpike.
Oh, really?
My mother, when we go by there, she said, "There's where you were born."
And what dates were you born?
October the 30th of 1921.
And when did you come to Licking County? About?
It had to be when we moved here, April of '47.
What brought you down? What brought you here?
My dad bought this farm. He bought it in February of '47, and we were married in March. And when we came down here to my sister's place at Harrisburg, over here,
We were going to live in Michigan.
we were living in Michigan. I worked in their jewelry store,
Okay.
and when we came down here for Easter dinner over at Harrisburg, here just south of Columbus. My dad just said, "You want to go over and see the farm we bought?" I said, "Yeah, I'd like to see it." And so we came over here and looked at it. He had a big farm over at Springfield at that time where they farmed, and it was a wet year, '47 was, and he hadn't done any plowing or anything yet. Had 500 acres over there to put in crops, and that was 70 years ago. Then in the conversation, I don't know how it went now, but I said I'd come down and take care of this farm, but not for wages. I had to be on partnership. He said, "Well, that's fine. That's fine with him." So we talked it over, and I went back and told Martin we're moving to Ohio.
And you were all right with that?
That were told me.
Well, it was easy for her. She had gone. We met at Ohio State,
Okay.
and she went there for 3 years. She was on a scholarship, optometry scholarship, and so she had friends at Columbus, and it wasn't so bad her moving down here to Ohio because she had friends in Columbus.
So when World War II happened, did you enlist or were you drafted?
Well, I don't know how to talk intelligent about it, but I had been drafted, but one night I decided I was going to service, and I went into Springfield and signed up, but I had to wait for a couple weeks to get in because I had already been listed on the draft some way or other.
Right.
You understand better than I do. I know.
Yeah, I've heard of that. People doing that. So. Yeah.
And then a couple weeks later I went to Columbus here. What is this?
Fort Hayes.
Fort Hayes.
Was that one?
Yeah. And it was an army at that time.
Right.
And so we went there and took tests, and what did they do but ship us to Keesler Field, Mississippi, and it was Army Air Force. And at Keesler Field is where I took my basic training.
So they decided to make you Air Force, Army Air Force.
Yes. Okay. And one day out in basic training, we were out on a dump, doing whatever we do in the dump. And a flight of AT-6s, a squadron, 6 of them, I think it was, flew over. And the fellow I was with, they had just changed the law at that time from pilot training, you had to have college, to high school graduates. And so I said to him, I said, well, why don't we go to the cadets after we saw those ACs? And I never thought about flying.
Right.
And so I don't know what happened to him, but we took our tests, and I don't know whether it was mental was first or physical was first. I don't know which. But anyway, I got in, and in the meantime, I had taken a test, and I was going to airplane mechanics school in Keesler Field, and it was 12 courses. And I had gone through 10 of the courses when they called me out and took me to cadets.
Well, that's all right. You knew how to work on your own plane then, if you needed to, huh?
It was a help in a way, because I know when we were flying combat, a good many guys would run out of fuel. But you know how it is when you tramp the brake or tramp the gas and stuff. You put a shot of gasoline, you use it that way, and so that was worthwhile to me. Not using the throttles that way.
So where'd you go for flight school?
So when they took me out of AM school in Keesler Field, they sent us to Nashville, Tennessee. It was a new base up there, brand new, in mud, and all the buildings had black paper on them, and it was all brand new school. And we went up there for just a few weeks. And I remember I was there at Thanksgiving, and my parents came down from Columbus and saw me on Thanksgiving. That was the first I saw them. It was in, I don't know, about a year in there. And so from there we went to the capital of Alabama. It was pre-flight, and where we were underclassmen, and where they taught us to eat a square meal. You don't look at your meal. You don't look at anything. You just fish it around here, and then we were for 6 weeks. We were underclassmen, and they made fools out of us and all that. Tried to get you to wash out there, and then after we finished that 3-month course there, Maxwell Field, Alabama.
Okay.
And I can't tell you the name of the city, but it is the capital of Alabama. Maxwell Field. Okay. And we went from Maxwell Field to I can't say the name of the town for primary training.
Okay.
And I flew a biplane, open cockpit biplane for 2 months, and I got sick. There, we were right along the Tennessee River. I used to get sick when I went up. Mr. King was my instructor, and one day he spoke didn't have radios in the primary trainers. He spoke in a tube. You have your seatbelt on? Yeah. And so he turned it upside down over the Tennessee River, and you had to learn to keep your feet on the rudder pedals, and I didn't know that yet, but when I was hanging there like that, my knees come down and hit me in the chin. Boy, I was sure.
Were you sick then?
No, I was just scared to death.
I was just saying, maybe that was what he was thinking about, if you're going to get sick.
But anyway, I was sure glad when he turned it over again. And then about 3 or 4 hours, I told him I'm going to quit cadets. I feel sick all the time. Never threw up. I just was air sick. And he told me, he said, "You're my best student. I don't want you to quit." And so I got over the sickness. And then about the 8th hour, he took us out of a little airfield outside of our base. And he got out. He says, "There, take her out. Go to it." And I was going to solo. I didn't know it. But in 8 hours, I soloed. And I was his first student out of 5 that soloed. And then we went from there to Greenwood, Mississippi. It was a basic training school where we flew BT 13s and 15s. And there was a bigger airplane that I think 450 horsepower and adjustable propellers and start radios. And we learned to fly at night there in basic training. And that was another place when I was flying one day solo. I was flying over the cotton fields along I don't know what river it was. But anyway, these black women were down there with their kids in the cotton fields, and I buzzed them. And they just dove in the dirt like I was gonna, when I was too close.
You see some character coming through here.
And some instructor was flying around. He saw me, and I knew that I'd had it. Went back to the base, and they call it a student court-martial. I was court-martialed. Then they gave me a flight check. And this is a side effect of that. The fellow that gave me the flight check was Captain somebody or other. I don't know his name now. But when I came back from combat and I was over at Lockburn as an instructor, here he came through Lockburn, learned to fly B-17, and I spoke to him. He didn't remember me, but I remember him. He gave me that flight check. But anyway, one of the things I remember about the flight check, it was under the hood, instruments, and he said, "Give me a two-turn." Anyway, he told me, but because you always needed a horizon to pull out of a two-turn spin. And it didn't have a horizon when I was under the hood. And I must have did all right because I passed the test. Because I always wanted to fly B-17. I asked for that.
Yeah.
And my friends, some of them made fun of me as a truck driver. And they were, my best friend from Springfield, he went in P-47s. And he's the one that made fun of me being a truck driver. But that was what I always wanted, to be 17. And this fellow from Springfield, we might have been on the same mission. It was an oil refinery in Germany, I remember that day. But he went down that day and they never heard of him again. And somewhere he crashed, or some of the civilians buried him and didn't take his dog tags off of him or anything, but his mother never heard of him again. But anyway, I graduated then from Columbus, Mississippi, and I went from Columbus to somewhere in Florida to learn to fly B-17, and I was there for 3 months and flew B-17s. And then they sent us from there to Salt Lake City. And that's where they put our crew together, the 10 men. And we went from Salt Lake City after a month or so to Dyersburg, Tennessee. And we were there for 3 months, and I forget what they call it, but you flew formation and dropped bombs on practice range and stuff. And we were prepared to go overseas from Dyersburg. And from Dyersburg, we went to Kearney, Nebraska. And they gave us a new B-17 there. And the navigator had the instructions to check out all the instruments and so forth. And for about 3 days at Kearney, we flew checking out all the instruments. And so from Kearney, we flew to somewhere in the New England states, I think, and I don't know where it was. We were there for a couple of days in New Hampshire, I think. And we went from New Hampshire up to Newfoundland. And we stayed overnight in there, and it was a cold, cold place. And there's snowbanks there as high as the mountains.
About when was that?
It was April the 1st when we went up there, and I thought maybe April Fool's Day we weren't going.
What year?
42, I think.
Okay.
And we spent the night there, and they had heaters on every engine on our airplane because it was cold. But they got us up early and the next morning, and we took off for Iceland, and we flew to Iceland. We spent the night in Iceland. The next morning we're up and we head down toward Northern Ireland. Then we flew to Northern Ireland. And that was the first experience we had with icing up. And we used our de-icers going down to Ireland. And when those de-icers worked, that ice just flew all over everything, the airplane. And in Ireland, they took our airplane away from us and shipped us across the Irish Sea on the boat. And then I lost track of what happened from there on. But anyway, we ended up in the 95th Bomb Group in Horham, England.
Okay.
And that's where I flew my missions with the 95th. May the 1st was my first mission, and it was to Sarreguemines, France, marshalling yards. And our second mission was to Berlin. We bombed Berlin. This was May the 7th. I went to Berlin.
Okay.
And then I went back to Berlin May the 19th. And on May the 12th is my fifth mission. We went to Brox, Czechoslovakia. That was the longest mission we were ever on. It was something like 12 hours. And I don't know what we were bombing.
Right.
Now some people did a better job of keeping their records, and they knew what they bombed their mission. But I was a pilot, and you just followed the rest of the formation.
Right.
And so it didn't matter that I knew anything. All I did was fly off the leader.
Told him to do it. So when you went on those early bombing rates like that, I mean, you had what? Any aircraft fire you had to worry about?
That and fighters.
Okay.
Early on, fighters were a problem. And at that time, our fighter escorts were P-38s, and they couldn't go in deep like later on. We got the P-47, they went in a little deeper. Then we got the 51, that was a good one. And after we had 51s, we didn't have to worry about it.
Well, tell about the one that flew right beside your window.
Oh, yeah, I don't know what mission that was, but I looked out the side of the window, and a Focke-Wulf 190 was right outside there, and he was lined up with us, and I don't know why he didn't fire, because we were dead in his sights. And I give my mother's prayers credit for that.
Right.
Didn't you get flack though in your knee or something at that time?
No, that was a way after that.
Oh.
I got on our 29th or 30th mission. On our 31st mission, we went to Munich, Germany, and flak. In just split second is the difference between a direct hit and a close hit. But this flak, it burst right in front of us, and a piece came through the windshield, and my hands were on the throttles. All four throttles were in your right hand, and it hit something and blew those throttles out of my hand. And then that split second, we were still flying, and so I gathered the throttles up again and kept on flying. And then a little while later, I felt something on my legs, running down my legs, and I reached down here and I got a handful of blood. That flak had come through there and broke up into pieces, and a piece hit me in the leg. And I didn't have any pain at all. Never had any pain.
Wow.
And it hit me in the leg, and it went into the bone, and they said that it scooted down the bone. And anyway, the top turret man and his son, just lately, last few months, he's contacted me. His son, the top turret man, visited us in Florida one time after when we lived down there, and well, anyway, the top turret man patched me up. At that time, they didn't have penicillin. They had what were the drugs that they had?
I don't know. All I can think is sulfa, but
The sulfa drugs. I think that's right. But he put the sulfa on and wrapped it up, and then I flew the airplane back home and landed it. Then they hauled me off to the hospital. And I was in the hospital 2 weeks, and while I was in the hospital, the crew went on R&R. I never did get an R&R. the other 9 men went on R&R, and I was in the hospital for 2 weeks.
did they dig it out of you, the flak?
Yeah, they gave it to me, and I had it for a long time, and I don't know what. I never did know what happened to it. But then we flew 4 more missions after that.
When was that? What date was that you got?
That was July the 31st of 42.
Okay.
And then after that, we went to Stettin, Germany, Brest, France, Frankfurt, Germany, and then back to Brest on our last mission. So I suppose half my missions were to Germany, and part of them France.
So how many missions total did you have?
35.
35?
Actually, it was an odd thing that on each mission they had extra airplanes flew along until you crossed the English Channel. And then when you started crossing the English Channel, they turned the extra airplanes, turned them back. And this particular day, the flight was to Calais, just across the Channel in France. And I was just, man, I was so close to a mission, but didn't get it. It didn't count. So I'd gone through all the negatives of taking off with a bomb load, and then going back home with a bomb load. And but so I had 35 missions, but I actually was real close to 36.
And then once you got your 35 missions in, you were done, right?
Yes, with just a day or a couple days, ours was the only crew that left the base that day. We went up to Scotland, and we were there overnight and got on the Queen Mary, and we come home on the Queen Mary, and it wasn't loaded coming home.
That's what I was gonna ask you how loaded it was.
No, and the officers were in the top deck, and they treated us royally and fed us greatly. But the 6 enlisted men were down the deck or lower, and they didn't get fed like we did. It wasn't right to human beings, but just because you're an officer, you get treated so much differently. But anyway, we took them a little bit of our food, because we were getting anything we wanted, steaks and so forth. And then we come into New York then. I was in New York for just a day or so, and I got on a train and went to Springfield, Ohio. When we went through Columbus, we were that far from a trainload of German POWs that who knows what contact we had with them just a few days before that.
Right.
But they brought trainloads of POWs over here and had camps around us somewhere over there. I don't know where they were. But that was interesting. Just you know how close trains park in the going through the.
When Mother and I came down to Ohio State, and we had that experience. Saw the prisoners of war in those R&R camps, not R&R camps, but what do they call the camps where they kept in?
I don't know what they call them.
And I can remember catching the trains that way and seeing these guys like playing basketball and things like that, but they were prisoners of war, having a good time.
Yeah.
They had jobs then on the farms. Some of them worked on the farms around wherever they were.
What was your rank? What did you get out? What was your highest rank?
I got up to first lieutenant. We were on our 19th mission. The navigator. I had a good navigator, and that was probably just as important as being a decent pilot. But we were supposed to start training after our 20th mission as a lead crew. And our navigator, bombardier, and right waist gunner were shot up pretty badly. And the navigator was shot up bad and sent back to States. So we never became a lead crew because the navigator was so important.
Right.
And but he was sent back to the States, and he died a couple of years after that. He died of leukemia, and his arm was shot up so bad. We wondered whether that injury had anything to do with leukemia.
Well, he said the vessel, the blood had to kind of blurp across that spot. It didn't flow like it should.
So your plane was hit more than that once that you got flak.
Oh yeah, pretty every time you get holes in the airplane, and sometimes you get lots of holes. And I've seen direct hits where those shells hit the airplane and burst, and I can remember one particular time just off to our right a little ways. You couldn't tell it was an airplane. It was just a big ball of flames flying through the sky, and there was 10 guys in there that never got out of those airplanes.
But of your crews, no one ever got killed on your plane. Of your crews, the guys that rode with you, none of them ever got killed on the plane.
Never killed on the plane. No, these 3 fellows were shot up pretty bad that day, and the front end of that airplane, with the bombardier and the navigator, both hit. It was like a slaughterhouse up there. The blood was all over everything. But the right waist gunner, now I didn't know this at the time, but he was just about out of blood when we got back to the base.
Oh my goodness.
And he almost bled to death. And we visited with him. He was from North Dakota.
Mm-hmm. Bismarck?
Bismarck, North Dakota, yeah. We visited with him a couple times. Well, and he and the top turret gunner come down to Florida one time when the 95th Bomb Group had a reunion at Disney. And they come and stayed with us for about a week or less than a week. And it was fun getting together again.
Oh, I'll bet.
And they told me, they said they remember seeing him in pardon me, I sound like a guy. His hands, holding all those things, and it's cold up there, but his hands were sweating from the tension and the stress from it.
Yeah, and they told Margie how thankful they were that I brought them home.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I wasn't taking you home. I said, I was going home and you were going along. So there was 10 men on board, and they were thankful that we got back.
This may seem like a stupid question, I don't mean it for it to be. Did each flight get easier on you, or did they get harder because you were thinking you knew what could happen, or or you just did it?
I don't have the answer to that, but I don't think they got any easier, because those last 4 after I got shot up on 31, the last 4 weren't easier than probably the first ones might have been easier. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I'm surprised that our second mission was to Berlin. And we have some formations that showed where we flew. And on that second mission to Berlin, I was flying off the left wing of the leader. I don't know how we got there on the second mission, because usually new flights were flown at tail end.
So when you came back to the States, then did you stay in the Army Air Corps, or and do something else, or were you done? Did you get out?
No, I was in after we come home. I guess we had a month at home, and then I was sent to Miami Beach, to a big motel there, a hotel on the beach. and we took tests and stuff over there. And I don't think I was there very long. And I asked to be sent to Lockburn,
Right.
Columbus, because my parents lived in Springfield. And so I was sent up to Lockburn pretty quick, and I was an instructor there. As 5 students to begin with, and I can't even talk intelligent about it from that point on. But anyway, I do remember this, that we would fly at 6 o'clock in the evening till midnight. And the next day at noon, you'd fly from noon till 6 o'clock in the evening. The next day, you'd fly from 6 o'clock in the morning till noon. And at noon, I'd go to Springfield, home. I'd go home for the afternoon, all afternoon, and all day the next day. And I'd be back over there at 6 o'clock, then the 4th day, to start a new 3 days.
Right. So when did you get out?
I got out in August of 45.
And then, so then did you go back to Springfield?
Yeah, my parents still lived on that farm in Springfield. And I went, and one day I went in, after I got out, I went in town looking for a job, and they were looking for a manager for the Springfield airport. I didn't have the confidence to do a job like that. And so I went back home.
He could fly the planes, but he couldn't tell other people to.
You flew 35 missions in Europe with people shooting at you, but you didn't feel like you could run in that airport.
Yep. I went back out to the farm and worked on the farm for well, at that time, when I got out of the service in August, I didn't want to go to school. I wasn't a student. I never studied. Anything I ever got, I knew it up front, some way or other.
Right.
And so then they encouraged me, and our veterinary, he encouraged me and took me over to the veterinary school. I met a couple All-Americans who were on the football team, were veterinary students. And so I went to Ohio State. I started the 3rd quarter. And before that, I used to talk to Margie. I said, I'm going to go back home. And she'd always talk me out.
His sister was my roommate.
Okay.
One of my roommates.
But then, that particular day, it was a nice day, and my dad was plowing. He needed the help too. But that didn't matter. I went and told Margie, I said, I'm going home. I packed everything up, so she didn't talk me out of that. And so I went back home. And then I was on the farm for I don't know that. While Margie was going to school, she went about 3 years. But that's her story of herself. We give the Lord credit for, when she got out of high school, she thought she would go to college. But about the time college was starting, her mother had a heart attack. And they had this jewelry store. I worked in the jewelry store, and Margie worked there. And so then they said, man, we need you now. And they said, you stay here next year, maybe next year we'll sell some bonds and you'll be ready to go. But anyway, then the next year came along and her father had a heart attack.
He had,
Then,
I think, kidney problems.
anyway, somewhere in this time, but the man that once owned their jewelry store was
He was a friend of the family.
and he was an old what was he?
He was a what?
What was he? He passed out these glasses.
Oh, he was in real estate, but he also did optometry. He was not like a licensed optometrist. And back in those days, all they did was they took these wire frames, and then they would add lenses until you could see. And it's as good as anything today.
Right.
Anyway, he said, "Well, Margaret," he said, "there's a Michigan Optometric Society is offering a scholarship, and it's 4 years, paid full scholarship for 4 years. I had a choice of 3 places. I could go to Canada, to Ontario, and I didn't want to go to Canada, or I could go to Chicago, and I didn't want to go down to the city, and or Ohio State. So Ohio State was the way it came. So, and that's how I roomed with his sister, met him first thing.
Well, anyway, I was over at Springfield at home on the farm, and I'd drive over to Springfield every weekend anyway. Then I finally talked Marty out of school, and she quit school, and we went. And I went to Michigan, and I stayed up there with her family and worked in the jewelry store for 5, 6 months, something like that.
Were you married then?
Mm-hmm.
We weren't married.
Well,
We weren't married till March.
Okay.
during that period of time, we were married.
So you got married
Yeah.
in March of '47?
March.
And then we moved down here in April of '47.
Did you ever want to fly again after you flew?
Well, no. My dad had an airplane of his own after that, and he did when I was a kid. He had an airplane.
Oh, okay.
But he had this air coupe, and I flew in it a couple of times, and Marty and I flew it together a few times.
Did you ever do an honor flight? Did you ever get to do an honor flight?
Yeah, I did it just a couple of years ago. Went to Washington.
Good.
I got more thank you for my service in one day than I did in 3 years before that.
Well, I appreciate you taking time to talk to me and let us know, what your history was with